to the Learning Reinvented podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden.
And James Politilo from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we want to explore a question that we've been kicking about between the two of us, which is, will AI make us less capable? So, Katie, why have we been talking about this one?
I think it's a really interesting topic. Obviously, in previous episodes, we've alluded to AI kind of taking off and becoming more popular during 2024. And I think it's going to become more popular during this year as well. And then I think the thing for me is that where you've got things like Copilot and it's going into the workplace and you've got more use of AI in general, my biggest concern is everyone going to be the same? Are we going to end up writing the same? Are we going to end up having similar images? Are we going to lose that sort of creativity that we have as people because we're reliant so much on AI to then produce stuff for us? So is anything going to be unique? And then what is unique, And there are lots of questions that we've kind of coming up with just talking about it. And then in regards to kind of schoolwork as well, I saw a video recently and it was about a teacher asking one of the kids to review and summarize videos that they had to watch, but they got AI to do that for them. So instead of taking an hour to watch these videos, it took them 4 minutes because AI summarized them for them. And then it's, to me, questioning, are we losing a big skill set because people aren't able to then do that for themselves? They're so reliant on AI. I think there's so many questions about it. And it's quite scary and quite worrying.
And I think it's a really interesting question because we've got the whole skills and reskilling agenda that's coming back round. So, we've seen the last few years in learning, we had everyone moving towards skills about 2-3 years ago. Then last year was predominantly AI into learning tech was the fad. I think that's becoming sort of mainstream and established, and then people are flipping back to what are we actually trying to solve, and people are back to talking about reskilling. And I think it's really interesting to think about what skills do we actually need and where does that leave us. So you talked about that summarizing a video, and I see all these use cases similar to that where it's like, rather than read this long document, ask AI to scan, read it and tell me what's relevant. So we're almost outsourcing our thinking there because we're reliant on AI having all of that skills and knowledge and contextual understanding and everything else that we do. And of course, it may well get here and we can go to the arguments of this is the worst AI you'll ever be. I don't always buy into that. I think AI can get worse because of the data going in, and we'll probably come back and explore that in our conversation. But that ability to synthesize information and to pull out relevant points, I think is really, really important. And being able to have your own opinion and not just sit there and be fed an opinion from something else. So, I'm signing up to terms and conditions, and this was something I posted out about over the festive period was, people signing up and doing the LinkedIn summaries or any of the other summaries that tell you about your year's activity. Firstly, I find it a bit bizarre. I'm very data driven, but I don't want to naturally humbly brag about how many people have followed me on LinkedIn or how many posts. I'm not quite sure the point of it. But then secondly, if you sign up to that service, do you realize you're giving that service access to all of your content, and that can therefore use your content? So you're handing across all of your thoughts to someone else just so that you can get a little bit of banality that you can share with people. And people don't think or read those terms and conditions. But now if people are, the natural response will be, I don't want to read 5 pages of terms and conditions because, I know the conversations we always have, you don't like reading stuff. You won't necessarily do that. You generally outsource that in the business to me if there's something long to read. But,
Yeah.
people will use that in AI and say, well, I'll just put it into ChatGPT and that will tell me what I should be aware of. Now, that's might work a lot of the time, but does it pick up all the nuance? Does it know the things that are really relevant to your business? And the counter argument is maybe get better at prompt writing and tell AI everything, or train AI to become a mini version of you. But that just seems a bit weird to me. Like it feels like you're outsourcing yourself and your thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I can see the benefits of AI. I looked at Copilot recently for one of our clients, and using other tools around Copilot, etc. And I saw it in Word and Excel and things like that. And I found it really useful because you might have a really long document in Word and it can change the format for you and it can pull bits out. But you've inputted that information for the most part. It's just making it more succinct and more easier to read and reformatting. That I can see the use of doing it. And equally in Excel, I can really see it being useful because Excel, you can do so many different variations of things. Having Copilot, being able to do that for you and do it quickly and do it more efficiently, I completely get for those processes. I think where you've kind of mentioned it as well, where we're inputting data, what's the source of truth? I think that's where it comes back to as well. Like, what's real when you're asking it questions? I know you've got a really great example of this as well. How do we know what AI is telling us is the truth if we're not sure of it ourselves? That's the risky part. I think where it's for things that you can see and you can get the outcome and you know what you're expecting and you can see quickly if it's right or wrong. I think it's really, really useful. And I think having it in kind of chatbots and stuff like that, super useful because it kind of takes away. But then equally, I still think you need that human element, especially in customer service. I've had an experience recently where I've been emailing customer services and you can tell that it's automated or a script or AI. I'm not entirely sure which one it is, but I'm asking questions and I'm getting back the same email essentially, but very different, slightly different writing in each one, but they're telling me the same message. It's not actually answering my question. So it's either people writing from a script or AI not picking up what I'm asking it because it's looking out for other keywords. I don't know what it is. But it's really frustrating as a human at the other end of that. Because you feel that you're not being listened to. So I can see it where you need instant answers quickly and you might not have that resource. I think it's super useful there. I'm not slating AI completely or anything like that. I can see the real benefits of it, but I think you still need that human element, especially in those sorts of roles. I know you've got the great example of the kind of the source of truth. I think if you explain that one as well, I find that really interesting.
No, absolutely. I'll come on to that in a second. Just want to pick up on something you said there about, the customer service piece and the hitting the brick wall. And it almost feels like, go back to the term of the computer says no. It does feel like you've got that coming through from the computer, i.e. AI, but also, again, you get that from humans as well because they're forced to deliver a process and they're not almost allowed to think, or they're not allowed to deviate from a script or deviate from that. And that human nuance and difference is what gets lost along the way. And I think what does happen is people are starting to outsource those tasks they maybe don't feel energized about or skilled in, or just to do things quickly or scale up or any of those things we've talked about on previous podcasts. But where you then do that, and you've talked about some great examples where it can help with processes, but as you mentioned, where you don't know the answer, and sometimes you go to AI and say, okay, I want to find out the answer to this. And I know people will start with that, but then you're back to those skills that, we should learn earlier on in our life. And I know as part of education for me was around, what do you trust data? What's your own comprehension ability? Can you synthesize data? Can you pull out the different parts of an argument? And those skills are probably becoming even more important now because of, as you mentioned, the absolute ability for something which is untrue to be presented as correct. So was doing a bit of experimentation around this where I was asking ChatGPT, and it could be any other AI agent, to provide me with answers to questions. And you summarized it really well by saying ChatGPT is a people pleaser. So I went through a series of asking ChatGPT a set of questions that in essence, it shouldn't have been able to answer, but it still did, and still did confidently. So the journey I went through was trying to do a bit of research in the market. So I was like, tell me who are the customers of this particular company. And it came back and gave me some information about that. Sort of going back and fact checking, I could see almost some level of scraping of maybe customer testimonials on their own website or some of the review sites, etc. So it's taking a best guess. Before that, it had given me quite a bland answer of just giving me some sectors that might be customers of this organization. I then asked it to give me further lists of customers. And not only did it give me organizations that weren't associated and weren't customers, it also made up organizations. So it almost got into this pattern of producing information that followed this pattern. And it's important to go back and think about how these large language models work. So if we go back to the days of predictive text, that's what this is doing. So you would type something, and I know my mum gets really annoyed by predictive text because she probably doesn't write in a pattern that's normal. So because she doesn't write in a pattern that's normal and that the AI is predicting, she finds it starts filling in words that aren't
She
what she
didn't mean
wanted
to.
to say. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And we're seeing exactly the same with these models. And I think where people become reliant on things and have those abilities to ask questions and get answers that look convincing and maybe don't have the time or the impetus or whatever else to really fact check that. And it almost makes it longer than if you've done the research yourself. So I find it sometimes starting with a blank sheet of paper is easier for me to write what I want to write. And then maybe I can use AI to polish that a bit or whatever. But I know some people start the other way around and literally say, write me something on this. And then you end up rewriting something. I've always personally found that harder to do. And I find the same sometimes with research is adding these as assistants. So, it's artificial intelligence, but to me, it should be assisting you. And I think a lot of people are now putting it in the driver's seat and getting in the back and doing something else. So they're letting this drive them around. They completely wouldn't see if they're about to be driven off a cliff because they're sat there watching some videos in the back of their car, is the analogy I'm almost using. Whereas I think we should be still using it as a bit of a guide, maybe a bit of a sat nav. I know you've got some views on some of the skills that have even been lost when people are sort of mindlessly following the instructions of AI. But I think we're giving too much control and outsourcing some of the things that really we should be keeping ownership for. And I know not everyone's doing that, but I'm seeing that creep into more and more behavior. And then conversely, off the back of that, my question is, so I've asked AI this question of tell me the customers of X, and they've come back and given me confidently 400 customers for X organization. I happen to know that they have no more than 100 customers. So, 300 are going to be wrong. Even are the 100 right and where's the lottery in between? But AI's produced that answer. Is AI now digesting that answer and providing that to be the truth? And therefore, is that reinforcing incorrect information and hallucinations, as they're known, coming back out in the future? So I think there's lots and lots of questions. And, it leaves me questioning how people approach things, how we, as you said, what do we trust and what is the truth and how do we know what is true?
Yeah, and I don't have the answer for that. I don't think anyone does. I'd like AI to tell you if it didn't have an answer. So, like in your examples, And if it didn't know how many customers or didn't know what the customers' names were, that's fine. But just say that. And I don't understand how it thought it did know that anyway, without it going and hacking into someone's database to find out what their customer list is, you know. To me, it's scraping the websites and it's looking at the information that's readily available. And that's how it's getting it. And that's fine, because I don't think it should be infiltrating anything that it shouldn't be, because that should be illegal. And I'm pretty sure it is. That's why it's probably making it up. But I think you need to have that point where it's like, actually, no, I don't know the answer. That's totally fine. Similar to Google, if it can't find a page or doesn't know it, it tells you that, you know, nothing comes up. So I think, you know, you need that combination as well. I don't think it should just kind of make up, well, this is the type of industry that people have, customers come from. Let's just add in some more, you know. And I think this is where people need to just be a bit more conscious and a bit more wary when they're using this type of technology and what they're using it for. I think, like I said, in regards to process reformatting, you know, asking it to enhance, reword, things like that, I find it really useful. However, when it comes to things that are factual, and you don't know the answer, I wouldn't rely on it. Your example is a great example of that. And I think, yeah, we're starting to see it creep more into everyday life. I mentioned on our last podcast, or one of our last ones, about AI and cars, and like my mum is using AI, which is crazy. I never thought that she'd be one of like the first sort of people I knew that were using it in a car, especially. And it just blows my mind that we're kind of potentially going to be in a place where we're all driving around in AI controlled cars. I know you're still driving it, but it's telling you where to go if you're asking it. You know, it can cool down your car, it can heat up your car, it can open your windows if you ask it to, you know, all of these things. And it's awesome what it can do, and it's crazy what it can do. You're essentially driving a computer, in my mind anyway. But then it also scares me, like that fact as well. Like, people can know your every move. I know they can anyway with GPS and phones and stuff like that, but this just seems enhanced. And it's not that I'm doing anything wrong in my everyday life or anything like that, but it's just, where does that level of privacy, where is your privacy potentially, you know, when we're going to be in that state? Like, our phones are controlled by, you've got Siri, you've got Gemini, you've got all of those things that are on your phones, you know, you've got Alexas and technology that we're all kind of used to now. And then we're seeing it in cars, and, you know, we're reliant on it in work more. And, you know, where does it end? And can you switch off from it, is my worry question, you know. And where can you be private? Like, do you just have to go for a run in the countryside where there's no signal, for you to be private, or, you know, to not be tracked or not be followed or not, you know, not be reliant on it? It kind of makes me question a lot of things that I never really questioned before. And I'm embracing the technology and I can find it useful, but I do worry slightly for the future generations, for the things that we've said in regards to, are they going to have the same skill set that we grew up with, that we found important, or are we going to be dumbed down essentially, and dull and not unique? And, you know, it just reminds me of a film, or like films that you see with people and robots, and everything's grey and everything's a bit dull, you know. And that's, I don't know why I feel like that, but that's what I can see happening, and it's quite a scary place.
And it's interesting that, you know, what we do, a lot of our business is about helping embrace and integrate technology into enhancing performance, enhancing learning teams, HR teams, etc. And so we're not, you know, those people who don't embrace tech, but we always approach it with a happy balance of cynicism and trying to understand what it's trying to achieve and the value it's trying to add, and also the ripples that come from that, because you can't put tech into something without it impacting anything else. So technology impacts our behavior. Email has impacted our behavior. Phones have impacted our behavior. No longer going back to when I was a child and you had to, go out and actually agree to meet people at a set time, and things stuck more
Use a
to particular
payphone.
yeah. Or, even streaming online means that we don't have always those seminal moments. When you were down to 3 or 4 TV channels only showing things at a particular time, there became a rhythm to life that was almost more controlled, interestingly, because we're talking about technology controlling. So technology does create freedom in some ways, but it also creates a lack of freedom in other ways. So it is a change, and I can see the differences, and I'm, totally not against changes in technology, but I think sometimes we need to step back and look at those implications. And for me, I am seeing a over reliance to jump to AI tools as the first step. And I think I've said this on a previous podcast, but I think it strips away some of the joy of life and the joy of being human and the joy of problem solving and the joy of individuality. And that to me is a big risk.
I think you made a really good point there, and it's something that I've been quite conscious of in regards to watching TV shows and streaming stuff. I'm guilty of kind of finding something that I like to watch, and I tend to binge watch them. I can watch them in an afternoon or an evening. And what I've tried to do to provide kind of more structure and routine, I guess, to life, because I find that is more enjoyable, is to actually watch shows on the time that they're put on and wait for the next one, because that's something, I don't know if it's because that's how I grew up, because we didn't have I'm from a generation where like things like recording stuff and things like that were coming in when I was sort of like 10, 11. So you had videotape recording, but then we had the DVD. I remember having a DVD player which you could record onto as well. I don't think that ever really took off because it was so complicated. But then we started to get kind of Sky and Virgin and stuff like that, and you were able to pause live TV and you were able to record stuff, and so I'm used to doing that. But you still had to wait until they came on the channel for you to be able to record them, and you watch them at a later time still. So you could save them up and watch it as a binge watch, I guess. But then you saw the introduction of streaming sites, kind of iPlayers, and whatever you want to watch stuff from. But it did take the enjoyment for me away from watching those things, because I was watching it all in once. And like sometimes you had that disappointment of like, oh, like what am I going to watch now? Or like having to find stuff. And I found myself like really aimlessly like going through all the applications I've got on my TV, like looking through YouTube, and I was like, this is really dull. Whereas I've flipped that more this year as well. I know we're only kind of 9 days in, but I made a conscious effort to start watching things at the time that they're put on, and I find them more enjoyable, and I actually look forward to it more. And I've actually found that I'm not aimlessly scrolling, and I'm not reliant on that so much, because I've kind of got things scheduled in. I think where you live in a world without routine and schedule, for me personally, I end up feeling a bit chaotic, and my mind, I can't live like that. I like being spontaneous, don't get me wrong. And I think the technology in the world we live in allows us to do that, but when it allows us to do that too much, like where does that end? You need that level of structure, routine. And I think in regards to AI, it comes back to like, what's that source of truth, where if it's constantly feeding us information and kind of making it up essentially, and we're all relying on it, and we're all going, oh, that's right then because we read it somewhere, what becomes the source of truth? What becomes right? Why are we doing it as well? Like, why are we doing stuff? What about if we just didn't do it? Like I've got so many questions that come from this, like, and I could have tons of conversations, and I still don't know what the answer is, but it just makes me question what we're doing, and are we doing things right?
And I think it's taught there in interesting about almost binge and instant gratification, because like binge watching, binge eating, binge exercising, and people want instant gratification, and waiting for something and patience or hard work and diligence. And you see this playing out, and take weight loss and injections or operations or anything that gives you that quick fix feels in life, and AI is being loaded with that. Because where AI will go wrong is people wanting the instant gratification and not wanting the hard work. And I think that's maybe stepping back and seeing the picture is everything in society driving us into binge and instant gratification, and therefore very, as you said, very big highs of, oh, I've watched this 10 episodes in a row and now I'm left abandoned because I can't watch that
Wanting
anymore.
more.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to find my next dopamine hit of my next, thing I'm going to binge. And is that the same in life, that we don't have almost the spread of things happening? And therefore, in the same way at work, we're not taking the time to do things. We expect things instantly. We don't expect to have to work for things. We expect things to be served to us. And maybe that's what's driving some of the challenges around the almost misuse of AI, but it's maybe because that's society's behavior being reflected through the tool, and therefore that's feeding itself. So it's
Yeah.
adding to that over time.
And don't you think that that's going to cause more issues? So, like you said, if people have binge eaten and then they can have an injection and then they can get skinny again and not do any of that without. So they're getting the gratification potentially from eating. And this is just purely an example, but then they're getting a gratification from taking an injection, losing weight. And you're binge watching shows and then you're getting that high and then you're getting that low. Are we potentially causing ourselves way more issues in the long run because we're constantly trying to find that? Like, where is our peace? Where is our relaxation? Because we're always after things, like, and you see it with social media and you can see what other people are doing and everything seems happy and everything seems great and amazing, but that's not reality. Like, are we living in this sort of weird virtual reality of everything needs to be instantaneous, everything needs to be great, everything needs to be amazing? Are we losing the ability to have that emotion of like being bored? I remember being a kid and being like on a Sunday, and if it was raining we couldn't go outside, but just being really bored. And like, I kind of miss feeling things like that and feeling bored, and because that spark creativity. Like, what can we do to then make ourselves not bored? Like, do we go and like build a den, or do we go and make up a game, or play a board game and things like that? Like, I it just feels like those things are missing, and I don't know if that's because I'm an adult now and perhaps you wouldn't fill your time with that and you can do other boring stuff like cleaning or whatever. But are we potentially losing it because we've got so much available to us that we don't have time to feel those other emotions? And are we going to fill those voids with other things that are potentially bad? I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think there's lots and lots of big questions we've
Yeah.
asked today, and probably ones we're not, everyone will be pondering in some way, shape, or form. And I'd love to know the thoughts of our listeners, or, what's your experience? Where have you had AI give you an answer that it shouldn't do? Do you believe that AI should turn around and say, no, I'm not going to answer that question? Should that be something we're expecting, or are we reliant just on the user to ask sensible questions? So lots and lots of questions I think we brought out of the podcast, but I'd love to hear other people's views on those.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to see how people are using AI, especially within work. Is it for those processes? Is it for that thought leadership? Some really good examples of that would be great to see. And yeah, interested to find out more about what people are doing. And by no means am I slating AI. I think it's a super useful tool. I've just got so many questions around the outside of it as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.